everyone. Nice to see you all here today. As Melissa mentioned, my name is Anna Watson, and I am both a Sea Grant UW Water Science Policy Fellow, and I'm also a water policy specialist here at the Center for Water Policy, housed at UW-Milwaukee School of Freshwater Sciences. And as part of my role, I coordinate the Freshwater Collaborative's Water Policy Network. And so for today, I'm just going to give a brief introduction to our speakers, turn it over to them, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm excited to introduce our speakers today, David Hart and Leah Bulbula. David Hart is a senior scientist with the University of Wisconsin Aquatic Sciences Center, and he also serves as the Associate Director for Extension at Wisconsin Sea Grant. He directs a staff of outreach specialists who extend coastal scientific knowledge throughout Wisconsin. His research, outreach, and teaching occur at the intersection of geographic information science, urban and environmental planning, and coastal management, with a focus on the application of geospatial technologies to promote resilience to natural hazards. And then Leah Bulbula is a second-year master's student in the Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture and the Department of Geography at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her thesis research is looking at the relationship between socio-spatial mobility and access to transportation and how this impacts the health of communities in Madison, Wisconsin. Upon completing her master's in 2026, Leah plans to continue her education by pursuing a PhD within the same two departments. And she spent the last year looking at and analyzing comprehensive plans for Wisconsin coastal towns and how they have implemented coastal resilience methods. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, David and Leah.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm going to share my screen here and then bring up the presentation and then just wait for somebody to say this worked. So you can see the slides okay.
I can see it, yes.
Excellent. Okay. So the topic today is how community plans in Wisconsin address resilience to coastal hazards. And it'll share some work that both Leah and I have done. It'll be in two parts. The first part is just how hazards are addressed in community plans in Wisconsin. They're going to draw on some reports that we did a few years ago, and one again that's ongoing now, looking at comprehensive plans in coastal townships in Wisconsin, and then kind of pulling out some best practices through a story map collection. And then the second part is looking at the use of the plan integration for Resilience Scorecard to show maybe how community plans could be better integrated to address coastal hazards. So we'll start with part one here, and just to kind of mention that this all got started, for me anyways, back about 12 years ago when the NOAA Coastal Storms Program came to the Great Lakes. And the NOAA Coastal Storms Program was a multi-year collaborative effort that moved from region to region, was designed to make NOAA data and tools, funding and outreach accessible to make communities safer from coastal storms. And when they would move around from region to region, oftentimes NOAA would tap into Sea Grant capabilities. And if you don't know about Sea Grant's a partnership between NOAA and coastal states through their universities to conduct research on coastal issues and then get that research out to people who can benefit. So imagine the research base out there about how communities can be better resilient to coastal storms, and then kind of getting that out to people. So when the program came to the Great Lakes, NOAA had an RFP for the Sea Grant programs to see who would be the program who would kind of coordinate that outreach. And our director at the time, Anders Andren, said, David, you should put in a proposal for that. And so I did. And one of the main points that I wanted to make in this proposal was to acknowledge that there were already a lot of ongoing state and federal activities in the Great Lakes region to address coastal storms, and that a lot of our local governments had plans in place already to guide growth and change and to address and mitigate natural hazards. And I think we should try to work with those rather than creating whole new ideas. And so the proposal that we put in really had that at a core, some small grant programs, run through the various sea grant programs in the region. And we really did a lot of work when we were the successful program chosen to be able to assess the needs of coastal communities in the region and then provide some resources to help them. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump here to talk about just what do we know about comprehensive plans in Wisconsin. And we have a pretty comprehensive plan inventory in Wisconsin, organized and put together by Peter Harriet at the Wisconsin Department of Administration. Gets updated on a regular basis, was just updated at the end of October. And you can kind of see up in the green there, pretty much all counties have a comprehensive plan in place. Excuse me, same with our coastal, across the cities across the state, and many of our villages and towns have plans in place. So I'm going to take a couple slides from a report that Peter put together a couple years ago to kind of show what that looks like for comprehensive plans. This was a report that looked at the status of plans as well as the presence of zoning, official mapping, and subdivision regulations and kind of things related to planning in the state. And this was a couple years ago. And one of the things that we can see here, there's a requirement in the comprehensive planning legislation in the state that plans to be updated at least every 10 years. And you can see here that about a third of the plans for cities and counties are older than 10 years, and the majority of them for smaller villages and towns in Wisconsin are more than 10 years old. But again, kind of showing that a lot of them do have plans in place. This next slide just takes and kind of shows a spatial perspective of that. So if you kind of see any trends here that you can see maybe in the southern and eastern parts of the state, there's a little bit higher presence of plans that are within the last 10 years. If we kind of go over to on the right-hand side to the municipal, it's really kind of all over the place, and you can still see a little bit of that trend out there, but you can kind of see that that it's really kind of a mixed picture, in the state, again, with a lot of plans in place, but several of them more than 10 years old. Now, the other kind of main plan that kind of helps us, address and understand coastal hazards are hazard mitigation plans. And this is a graphic from a status map at FEMA. And you can see, again, those light blue counties in Wisconsin have approved hazard mitigation plans approved by FEMA, and those in yellow show those that are over 5 years old. And the currency requirement for hazard mitigation plans is every 5 years. It's really largely done at the county level, and there's a little bit of difference between the map and a database on the FEMA website. But looking at that database, there are 7 counties that have expired plans, and there's a handful of other entities like tribal nations, a city or two, a kind of a joint city university effort. There's just a few of those, but mostly hazard mitigation plan happen at the county level. And the approval is important to be eligible for certain types of disaster assistance, including funding for flood mitigation projects. And having an approved plan can also help you gain points in FEMA's community rating system to reduce flood premiums. So that's kind of where we stand. Again, you can see largely we have a lot of planning going on in Wisconsin. Now, just kind of jumping back, one of the first things that we did with the NOAA Coastal Storms program was develop a one-click quick little map that lets you click on a coastal county, city, village, or town and get basic information about it. And you can see on the right-hand side, this is Douglas County. You can see some population trends, the shoreline miles on the Great Lakes, and then one-click access to some of the plans and codes, as well as resources like the main government website, a web map, just a quick way to be able to get information about coastal counties. So that's a resource that's out there and available through our Wisconsin Coastal Atlas. So I'm going to jump now to these reports. The first report we did kind of with support from the NOAA Coastal Storms program was done in 2015. It was led by Brad Sipple while he was a master's student in urban regional planning at UW-Madison. And Brad reviewed 52 comprehensive plans and 17 hazard mitigation plans in coastal counties, cities, and villages. We didn't touch on towns for this study. And he used keyword searches to go through and began to look at the plans and identify how they were addressing coastal hazards in the plans. You can see that we touched on all but one city, all but two villages, all but one county, and 2 out of the 3 regional planning commissions on the comprehensive plan side. And again, all but one county of our 15 coastal counties in Wisconsin for hazard mitigation plans, and a couple cities that did plans as well. In going through and looking at that, the plans that kind of stood out to us, there were 4 comprehensive plans, one for the city of Green Bay, for the city of Port Washington, for Bayfield County, and the village of Pleasant Prairie had strong practices and strong recognition of coastal hazards in them. A couple hazard mitigation plans, one for the city of Superior and one for Oconto County. And then one combination plan in Kenosha County. They had a multi-jurisdictional comprehensive plan as well as a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. Meaning that the county kind of combined the cities, villages, and towns in the county in both of their plans and kind of did a good job connecting them there. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in just a little bit. So some findings out of this were that the county and regional plans generally were more detailed in how they characterize coastal hazards and generally provided more implementation steps in the plan to improve coastal conditions in the community. In hazard mitigation plans, there was often a required risk characterization that looked at the whole range of hazards facing the community, and coastal hazards was often ranked very low in this risk characterization. And I think it's important to point out that 2015 was a time where we had an extended period of low water levels on the Great Lakes, so that may have influenced that. And then finally, many plans would describe the coastal hazards, but not include too many implementation steps to reduce the hazards that were mentioned. And then moving to this update, we decided to go back and look at plans again 6 years later. This assessment was led by another urban regional planning student at UW-Madison, Colin Miras, and he looked at 20 comprehensive plans and 16 hazard mitigation plans that had been updated during that 6-year period. And there we identified 5 comprehensive plans that really did a good job and wrote a bit more about them there. The city of Ashland, the city of Bayfield, the village of Fox Point, the city of St. Francis, and the city of Sturgeon Bay. And then there were 7 county hazard mitigation plans covering Brown, Douglas, Iron, Kenosha, Ozaukee counties, and the city of Milwaukee and the city of Superior. And then the findings that we had there, the first was that a growing number of communities included coastal resilience topics in their comprehensive plans, and 6 of them did it for the first time in that time period. I think it's important again to recognize that things changed after 2015 and lake levels went from record lows, certainly on Lake Michigan, but also to a lot of extent on Lake Superior as well, to near record highs in that time period. So maybe having a bit of an influence driving why more communities were looking at coastal hazards. We found that coastal hazards were often addressed in the natural resources element of comprehensive plans, but they were rarely identified as a risk in the other elements that really focused on development in the community. There are 9 elements that are kind of in legislation that are drawn out in the definition of a comprehensive plan. We found that several hazard mitigation plans included a more detailed analysis of processes, causes, and effects of coastal hazards as compared to comprehensive plans. And then finally, we saw that many county hazard mitigation plans the 2 city ones were addressing climate change. and making reference to climate change in what they were putting together. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about a story map collection that we did. After we completed these two reports, we wanted a way to get this information out in a kind of a broader context than a typical report. And Gabriel Wilkins, who again, another urban regional planning student at UW-Madison at this time in 2021, we started to create the story map collection to highlight some of the communities that had best practices. And so just to share with you, we started out, first of all, just doing a brief description of kind of what's the background of comprehensive planning and hazard mitigation planning. And then we went into each of these plans. And so one of them that we featured was the City of Ashland's comprehensive plan. They really did a good job looking at coastal hazards and coastal resilience related to their waterfront and their downtown. And they really recognized that Lake Superior was a great asset to the community, and that the environment should be preserved in that area. And the plan had also a detailed analysis of coastal hazards that focused on coastal erosion and shoreline change. The next community plan that we looked at was the Douglas County Hazard Mitigation Plan, and that also had a very extensive analysis of the erosion that has occurred along the Douglas County shoreline. It used a lot of information that was the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program helped to gather during that time period. And they had a lot of mitigation actions related to coastal hazards that were included in the plan, including the thought of acquiring or relocating properties that were at risk to damage from bluff erosion. And then finally, there was acknowledgement that the St. Louis River estuary was also experiencing some erosion, but it hadn't received the same attention as was done in the past along the open Lake Superior coast in the county. The next one, again, I mentioned this already, this Kenosha County combination of their comprehensive and hazard mitigation plan that was assisted by the Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and there really are strong linkages between the comprehensive plan and the hazard mitigation plan. And it really showcases a good way to be able to kind of coordinate between the municipal level, the county level, and the regional planning offices that are in the region. And again, the extensive analyses of coastal hazards that were in this plan included a lot of use of some resources that have been made available at the state level, again, with support from the Coastal Management Program, including the Wisconsin Shoreline Inventory and Oblique Photo Viewer. So a good combination of integration and coordination in planning here. The next one is the City of Milwaukee's All Hazard Mitigation Plan. And I think one of the things that really stood out was that they did a good job addressing climate change related to a range of natural hazards that were addressed in the plan. And they also did analyses of several different types of coastal hazards in their plan. And then finally, the City of Superior Comprehensive Plan. This one Gabe really felt was strong. It included a strong coastal hazards analysis section, but what Gabe really felt was a strength of this plan was how it was organized, including really great graphical presentation of information to complement the narrative in the plan. And he felt that it really opened up this plan to being understood by a wider audience. So it addressed coastal resilience topics, but it also was much easier to understand for a broader range of people. All right, and then the last section in this story map collection, I just added within the last year here was just a compilation of resources that could help communities who wanted to do a deeper dive into coastal resilience topics in their planning efforts. And so there's a few of them, like the photo viewer that I mentioned already. There's some tools to be able to understand changing lake levels and explore different topics. And then there are tools like the coastal resilience self-assessment that we adapted from some other efforts that were out done in the Gulf of Mexico region, the Plan Integration for Resilience Scorecard, a very detailed vulnerability assessment and scenario method developed by Professor Richard Norton at the University of Michigan, and the concept of adaptation pathways, and then pointing to some resources that can help to connect people and kind of create communities of practice that are out there as well. So now I'm going to jump over and turn things over to Leah to talk about the ongoing work that she's doing looking at comprehensive plans in coastal towns.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so I, for the past year, have been looking at how coastal towns have been implementing coastal resilience methods within their comprehensive plans. I use the 2015 and 2021 reports conducted by past master's urban planning students as somewhat of a framework, while also acknowledging and taking into recognition that I am looking at townships, which often tend to be a lot smaller than coastal cities, villages, and counties. So for the rubric for how I graded or scored these different comprehensive plans, I graded them on a score based from 0 to 3. For towns that received a score of 0, they either did not have a comprehensive plan or we weren't able to find one online, or their comprehensive plan made little to often no reference to coastal hazards or resilience methods. A score of 1 meant some type of incidental mention, meaning there were some concepts of coastal resilience mentioned, but not really any details of implementation. So they might have mentioned it, but there was no follow through with that. Plans that received a score of 2 had some action, there was good intent, but often low level of specificity, measurability, budgeting, or integration. And then the best plans, which were just a handful, received a score of 3, which were strong and actionable with details of specific measurable actions with timelines, budgets where possible, and integration across all plan components. So 46 of the 51 coastal towns that we looked at have adopted comprehensive plans as of October 31, 2025, per the comprehensive plan inventory at the Wisconsin DOA. 24 of these 51 towns have current plans, 22 have plans more than 10 years old. Across these, 22 towns received a score of 0, 12 towns received a score of 1, 11 towns received a score of 2, and 6 towns received a score of 3 based on the scoring criteria. The towns with the strong comprehensive plans relative to coastal hazards, so these would be the towns that scored a 3, are the town of Clover in Bayfield County, the town of Bayfield in Bayfield County, town of Gibraltar in Door County, town of Washington in Door County, town of Sheboygan in Sheboygan County, and town of Wilson in Sheboygan County. So the town of Sheboygan comprehensive plan, referencing most to the 2020 update. This plan was authorized by UW Extension at Sheboygan County. I felt that this was the strongest town comprehensive plan that addressed coastal resilience for a few reasons. One of the primary reasons was because they had a specific section dedicated to recommendations for natural and coastal resources. David mentioned this a few slides prior, that some towns had like incidental mentions of coastal resilience spread throughout, but they actually had a specific section not only documenting what they will do, but how the implementation will follow through the years. So that was one of the primary reasons why I found this to be the best plan. It was also very implementation focused. It integrated policy, ordinance, and intergovernmental practice into a single actionable platform. They have a daily development examination made directly responsible to the County Shoreland Zoning Administration. They had a whole natural resource chapters that moved beyond the narrative by listing inland surface water vulnerabilities such as sedimentation, erosion, and thermal loading, and then directly link those to governing rules. They also have natural resource management as approached as infrastructure. And I included one standout quote from their plan that says, ironically, it is the quality and abundance of natural and coastal resources, along with their proximity to the Sheboygan metro area and Interstate 43, that also potentially makes them vulnerable unless the pace and character of future development is carefully managed. That is just some insight into how they really were focused on the timeline of implementation in their plan. The next town that I wanted to highlight is the town of Washington. This plan was authored by the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission, and they had more than a few that were often really wonderful plans. This is just the one from that Regional Planning Commission that I felt was the strongest. This plan treated coastal conditions as an integrated dynamic issue rather than a standalone concern, which is often what led other town plans to not rank a 3. Their maps and inventories identified floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, and other environmental corridors as effective sitting controls that dictate the future land use map. Their implementation is iterative. There is an obvious procedure for annual check-ins and a defined path for changes when experience conditions or local priorities are beyond the chosen framework. And lastly, public input is heavily taken into consideration for shoreline access, natural resource preservation, and facility planning. The last plan I will highlight is the Town of Gibraltar Comprehensive Plan, also authored by the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission. This plan prioritized the waterfront as a central component of community well-being. They adopted an open implementation model that allowed policies to be refined as conditions change. Their on-the-ground successes are documented, such as stormwater and stream habitat improvements and beach restorations, which was a big priority for the residents of Gibraltar. Their environmental corridors include wetlands, floodways, steep slopes, and other restrictions. Like one of the other plans I discussed, public engagement was woven throughout the process, and in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, a story map complements it.
Thanks, Leah. I just want to kind of acknowledge that in presentation mode, I can't see any questions that might be coming up, so I will hit them when we're done, I think. And so I'll just kind of keep on going here and throwing information at you. We're going to shift gears and kind of go into that plan integration side now. And I just want to start by acknowledging that I've long followed Professor Phil Burke. He's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, as an expert on planning and hazard mitigation. And he's done a lot of really great research on just what makes a good plan and how can plan implementation be more successful. A number of years ago, he moved for a short time over to Texas A&M University, and there he started kind of deeper dive into how plans can be better integrated. And so with Jamie Masterson at Texas A&M, he developed this plan integration for Resilience Scorecard, and then he moved back to University of North Carolina, and together those two universities are really kind of carrying out this kind of cutting edge tool for looking at assessing how plans can be best integrated to be able to address coastal hazards. So here's the scorecard. It provides a process to be able to evaluate a community's network of plans to understand where there could be contradictory policies or where things work really well together. But those contradictory policies and elements of a plan can possibly increase vulnerability to natural hazards if they're not working well together. And the example that they use in their guidance is the city of Washington in North Carolina. And they showcase the comprehensive plan as really encouraging and concentrating development in their downtown waterfront that happens to be, in a flood-prone area, and their county's hazard mitigation plan says, well, we should really strengthen controls on development in these flood-prone areas. And you can begin to see the emergence of those contradictory policies there. And so a little bit now, just talking about what is a network of plans. Well, we talked a little bit about those primary plans of a comprehensive plan, a master plan, so to say, and a hazard mitigation plan. But there's a whole plethora of plans that are out there in communities. They can be under the topic of small area plans, like a neighborhood plan, a waterfront plan, a downtown development plan, or they could be more topical, like a functional plan covering watershed health, or capital improvements, or farmland preservation, or parks and recreation. And so you can see, this can get pretty big. Typically, when communities undertake the scoreline, they're looking at 3 to 5 plans, and it's just too much to try to take on every possible plan that's in a community. All right, so the process. And you would typically start on this policy side, looking and assembling your community's network of plans, and then diving into them, and then beginning to pull out those policies that have three criteria associated with them. First of all, is it a relevant policy tool? Can it influence coastal hazards? Does it have the potential to reduce or increase vulnerability to hazards? And is it defined by mappable place-specific terms so you can locate them? So that's kind of the first element of this. And oftentimes you can stop the scorecard there and really just have a policy focus on it. But if you want to go to the next step, that is this kind of GIS mapping component. And there you would go in and identify the granularity in which you'd want to do it, oftentimes through planning districts in your community, and then bring in the hazards you want to address. Oftentimes it might be floodplain hazards, looking at the 100, 500-year flood zones. You'd combine those and then relate those to the place-specific terms. And then that would give you that kind of spatial component to it. And then to look at policy scoring, if that policy that policy that meets the criteria kind of creates a negative impact to hazard resilience, you'd score it a -1. And then if it has a positive impact, you'd score it a +1. If it was neutral, you'd have it be 0. And then you can begin to kind of go into what does this mean to advance resilience in your community, an important step there. So this is what it looks like for the city of Washington in North Carolina. This is the policy specific kind of area. So you see those three criteria here. It's scored across the planning district, and I'm just pulling out a couple policies here. Here's a subdivision regulation that strengthens controls on flood-prone areas, and you can see that having a pretty positive impact. Down here, you've got a policy in the comp plan that bolsters and densifies the downtown and waterfront area that's in a flood-prone area, and you can see it have a negative score there, and negatively influencing resilience. And then to look across the different plans to total things up, here's that look at the comprehensive plan that has those kind of policies in it having a negative score, but the hazard mitigation plan that has a lot of strong statements about resilience having a positive score. So just a little bit of idea about how these results are presented. I'll just share a couple resources out there. There is a website called planintegration.com. If you want to kind of get more information, you can get the kind of the guidebook that leads you through the process. They have some good case studies from around the world. They have some journal articles if you're into that thing. And they even have a couple adaptations of the scorecard for heat and for wildfires. And then they partnered with the American Planning Association to get the word out. They have a planning advisory service, or PAS memo, for building resilience through plan integration, and you can do that. They also have some training if you're into an APA member like I am. Through their passport, you can kind of do some specified training on this method. You might be interested in how much time this takes. This is from their guidebook here, saying on that first part of looking at the policies, it generally takes 2 to 12 hours per plan to kind of dive through things. They say about an average. So if you're looking at 4 or 5 plans, it might take you half a week or so of staff time. If you're going that next step of doing the geospatial side, it may take you up to a week in time, particularly associated with the kind of engagement and advancing resilience ideas that is the last part of the process. All right, so I feel like we need more testimonials out here about this method, and this is one in a case study they have from Nashua, New Hampshire, where their city emergency management director undertook this process. In doing so, in the current version of their hazard mitigation plan at the time, they were able to identify 7 policies that were revised to be able to reduce vulnerability in certain areas of the city. And the emergency manager said, we really need to connect with the community planners when we undertake this method. And he really felt that this combination of kind of connecting with their planners really helped the process of undertaking the plan and making it stronger as they went forward. So one of the testimonials that are out there. So now I'm going to get in quickly here to 3 different examples that we have that I've been part of. beginning to look at this method. The very first time was in 2021, and this was with Cowan Miris, a planning student, and really dove into 4 plans in the city of Green Bay just as a way for us to understand this method, to see whether or not it was something we would get excited about and want to encourage communities to undertake. So we looked at 4 plans: a city comp plan, a county hazard mitigation plan, a city parks plan, and a county waterfront development plan. And there were 6 planning districts. Cowan did the full process for this. We did some GIS work. He looked at the 100 and 500-year floodplains, integrated them with social vulnerability characteristics, and mapped all those place-specific terms, and then did the policy scoring, just like the process I laid out for you. And just a quick take home from this, 3 out of the 4 plans decreased community vulnerability to coastal hazards. The comp plan for the city of Green Bay scored the highest, and the waterfront redevelopment plan scored the lowest, kind of close to a neutral value there. And a couple of things there. One thing that Cowan noticed was he wondered just how much potential there was for variability in scoring. Would different people really have different results when they undertook this method? That was something he brought up. And then once we did this, we wanted to share it with the community. And I'll say letting a community know that you tested their plans using this method that they didn't know anything about wasn't very effective in kind of getting their attention and excitement. I think just something to realize. Sharing this after the fact with the community just didn't get much resonance. Now I'll jump to the next method. We looked at the scorecard as part of a disaster preparedness grant that we had an opportunity. It was part of a disaster preparedness for coastal communities opportunity that a certain arm of NOAA, the Office of Response and Restoration, provided some funding for sea grant programs to help build local capacity in disaster preparedness. We applied for this. Jackson Parr, actually, he's a former Wisconsin Sea Grant Fellow and now with the UW Rural Partnerships Institute. He wrote the proposal. And we really focused on the communities that were in the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission in northeastern Wisconsin. So city of Marinette, around Green Bay, all the way down to the city of Sheboygan. So there were 9 cities in 7 counties in that area. And we put together 3 different project elements. The first was Jackson conducted detailed flood vulnerability analyses for each of the communities. We used something called the Extreme Event Game. It was a interactive role-playing game to engage the public in disaster simulation, in this particular case, a coastal flood. And he would do that in conjunction with volunteer organizations involved in disasters in communities, and didn't do it in all the counties, but those that wanted to do this. And then we looked at the scorecard, and we thought the combination of these things would hopefully help to kind of bring attention to disaster preparedness in coastal communities. So one of the things that Jackson found doing the scorecard were a lot of the policies in the city comprehensive and county hazard mitigation plans didn't have those terms, those policy relevant tools, influencing, increasing or decreasing vulnerability to hazards, or those mappable terms. So more than half of the, or about half of the policies listed in the plan didn't have all 3 of those elements. A lot of them didn't have mappable place-specific terms. So it kind of spoke a little bit to the lack of specificity in planning documents and the ability to be able to, kind of carry out the scorecard even. So just to give you a couple examples of what this might look like, this policy was one of them in one of the plans. It does have all 3 of those elements, continuing to enforce greater setbacks, looking at vulnerability on properties adjacent to Lake Michigan, place specific, through the county shoreline zoning ordinance as a policy tool. But a lot of them were more general than that. It might say just promote coastal hazards awareness. So just giving you an idea of what it might look like when you dig into these plans. So some of the findings, again, I mentioned already that they, a lot of these plans lack the specificity required to fully carry out the scorecard process. But we did go a little bit of a step further. We had a couple partners in this project, Wisconsin Emergency Management and the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission. And the Bay Lake RPC staff took some time near the end of the project to really dive in and explore and review the scorecard, and found that it was a bit challenging for them to be able to adopt it as is, but they developed a custom template to be able to look at the commonalities and contradictions among a network of plans across a variety of topics like risk awareness, policy alignment, implementation, feasibility, and sustainability. So they kind of went a step further and developed something that would be useful to them as they undertook a lot of plans in these coastal communities. All right, the last of our three scorecard implementations was through something called the Great Lakes Resilience Challenge. It was a technical assistance to Great Lakes coastal communities that was done from 2023 to 2024 with the Association of State Floodplain Managers, the American Planning Association, the Coastal States Organization, and the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network through our coordination. We had 4 communities: Minnesota Point in Duluth, Minnesota, New Baltimore and St. Clair Shores on Lake St. Clair in Michigan, and Wayne County on Lake Ontario in New York. And the technical process included a coastal resilience assessment, the scorecard, that detailed scenario planning and vulnerability assessment I mentioned earlier, kind of developed by Professor Norton at the University of Michigan, and the development of resilience action plans, which was led by ASFPM. And the process included, well, it's performed by APA, American Planning Association. It included the kind of plans you'd typically think of, but also included parks plans and capital improvement plans. They only did the policy scoring side of it, and they presented the findings in a series of virtual meetings to the communities. So the APA did the analysis, but the information was presented to the communities. And so some of the lessons that we learned, first of all, that the project partners should do a better job of highlighting how this analysis feeds later steps in the process, like the scenario planning and the action plan development. It felt kind of isolated, when it was conducted. They felt like that the policy should be put in more of a sortable list in a spreadsheet, and be able to identify some of those like low-hanging fruit or high-impact types of policies that can be changed. Maybe that we should move the process earlier. So it was the very first step of the process, because the resilience assessment asked a lot of questions about the status of plans in communities. We thought that maybe just even the terminology of plan integration for resilience scorecard might have been a bit too technical in nature, and maybe calling it a plan analysis took a little bit of maybe the complexity off of that. We felt like maybe we needed to engage communities more in the process. Maybe if they at least did the scoring on one of the plans, they might understand the process a little bit more. And then we felt like maybe the communities felt things were a little futile if they weren't doing a plan, like updating or doing a new comprehensive plan or a new hazard mitigation plan. What would they be able to do with the findings? So we found some challenges, in this process. So I'm going to hit the home stretch here and say that just closing thoughts, first of all, in part 1, there is a high level of hazard mitigation plan and comprehensive plan adoption. For comp plans, it's probably the influence of the comprehensive planning law passed in 1999 and early funding and ongoing funding support. Early funding support through the first few years of the program, but then in coastal communities, the coastal management programs really supported plan development. And we feel like the high level of hazard mitigation plan is probably driven by that access to flood mitigation assistance. Really mixed message about the plans, but we did find a positive trend in the influence of higher Great Lakes water levels and this funding assistance as well as the kind of technical assistance that coastal regional planning commissions provide, and the ability to network and talk about coastal resilience topics like these community of practices we have in Wisconsin, on Lake Michigan called Calm and Lake Superior called Chaos. And then finally, here we can really dynamically add more best practices to our story map collection, and we're really felt good about some communities taking and using story maps to enhance outreach and communication about their plans. On the second part, we felt like the scorecard can uncover conflicts between plans and improve awareness of hazard risk, but it does have some complexity to it. We learned that we could complete the full process from what we did in Green Bay, but question again, can we be consistent in this process? For the Northeast Wisconsin disaster preparedness, we found that a lot of the policies lacked one or more of the three conditions for inclusion in the analysis. And then for the Great Lakes Challenge, there were issues in timing, as well as the extra effort needed to really work with communities in this process. And so kind of at the end here, my last slide, I think we need more engagement to better make the case that communities would benefit from undertaking this plan integration work, that we feel like as far as the full network of plans, we could enhance our overview map to more easily provide access to a fuller network of plans out there. I do feel like we created opportunity for 4 urban planning students to really roll up their sleeves and get engaged in the kind of plans communities have that address coastal hazards. And I'll just finally acknowledge that just a little bit less than a year ago, we've hired a coastal adaptation resilience outreach specialist with a planning background. Her name's Carrie Malone. She's based in Milwaukee at the School of Freshwater Sciences, and she'll be somebody who I think will be a good resource going forward. So with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing so I can see more information and open it up for questions in the last 10 minutes we have here.
Great, thank you, David. I think Anna's gonna lead the Q&A here. I'll just invite everyone to turn on your cameras if you are comfortable with that, and we can have an open conversation.
Yeah, if no one else has one, I can go ahead and jump in with one that Tressie sent me. She was curious about how we hear a lot about coastal erosion on the Great Lakes, and kind of what do you view as another coastal hazard in this region that should be receiving more attention?
Well, I do think our two primary hazards that, through our state's coastal hazards work group, which is part of our coastal management program, that we spend a lot of time thinking about our bluff erosion, in our high coastal bluffs, can also be kind of shoreline erosion as well too. But we have these bluffs that erode in different ways on the Lakes Michigan coast as compared to the Lake Superior coast. And we try to collect a lot of information about how that happens. And so that's one of our primary challenges here, trying to encourage people to build as far away from the coast or from the bluff edge as they can, and try to kind of keep their bluffs in as good a health as they can. And then the other big hazard that we have is coastal flooding vulnerability, and that really takes place when we have high water levels and storms combined. And then we can sometimes have that even compound when we would have like river flooding. And so we've got those like lower communities with rivers that come in right at their harbors there. We can have this compound flooding. Milwaukee's got an element of that. Green Bay's got an element of that. We've got several communities that are like that. Those are our two main ones. There's others out there as well too that we need to think about. Certainly infrastructure, vulnerability, but those I think are the two main ones.
While we're waiting for others, just to follow up on that, David, related to the bluffs, do you see kind of a growing recognition that the bluffs require protection, and that we would need a statewide law on this? as opposed to the approach right now, which is very much left up to the local governments to decide if they're going to do any kind of protection. And it's more than protecting the bluffs, it's protecting people who own property adjacent to and are not actually alerted to the dangers.
Yeah, I think that we put a lot of effort into bolstering local capability because I think Wisconsin's got a strong heritage as kind of a strong local government presence in the state. And it goes back to kind of even the early days in the coastal hazards program. We worked on model ordinances and tried to work with them. So a number of communities have pretty strong ordinances in place. I think that there's probably a big hurdle to taking a coordinated approach like you might find in California. I think there would be a lot of expenditure of selling that kind of idea that would need to take place. And I certainly, I certainly would listen to, the argument on the other side of consistency is beneficial. I know we did an integrated assessment looking at communities north of Milwaukee, up from Shorewood to Port Washington, and one thing they said was they kind of looked for consistency of ordinance at the same time wanting the decentralized side. So it was a little bit of a mixed message there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I wonder what do you think, why is there such a difference in approaching bluffs as there is to shoreland zoning, where we do have a statewide now maximum?
Yeah, even that's got some differences where where it's applied, right? Oftentimes not. I mean, it's for unincorporated areas of the city, so there's even variability within that. I think that obviously kind of goes back to different times, in the 60s and 70s as the support for the shoreline zoning in the state. But even that has got variability in it, and from the perspective of our state and where it applies.
Okay, it looks like we have another question in the chat. I can read it out. Considering the various programs and plans in place at the local level, how do collaboration and integration actually occur in practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think regional planning commissions are really important in this effort. I see, a strong history of this, really having great backing information, in a regional planning commission like Southeast Wisconsin. You see this evolution of stronger and stronger plans and technical assistance. There were in the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission and same up in the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. We're kind of fortunate. We have three regional planning commissions that are strongly integrated with our coastal program that do great work carrying out. So I think that, and a lot of communities look to those regional planning commissions. So I think that's maybe the first thing to point to.
Yeah, I had a question about whether you were seeing any correlation between the specificity of plans and vulnerability, and whether or not, I guess the flip side of that would be, are there places that have low specificity but high vulnerabilities that would be places to target?
Yeah, that's a good. I think that if you kind of dig a little bit deeper into Peter Harriod's analysis, he started to kind of show those vulnerabilities from perspective of having a comprehensive plan that is is more than 10 years old and maybe not having some local government regulations. I think we could kind of maybe do something a little bit deeper in the coastal communities too, and maybe build upon that and kind of say uh, you begin to pull out some characteristics of these plans and kind of begin to relate them and analyze them across the full range as well there too. So maybe it's something that we can talk about with Leah going forward. Leah, I'm curious, why don't you tackle this question, because you have the freshest look at these town plans. So I wonder if you take that same question.
Yeah, I was actually just about to add on to that. So as you saw for the 6 plans that I graded as a 3, a lot of them, they had addendums within the past 5 years. I believe only one of them was 2017. From what I have seen, the plans that have the highest level of specificity and the most like detailed timelines, it seems that their plans are going to be implemented the best. And from when the original comprehensive plan was published to the time of the addendum, it looks as if they're following on that timeline. So as I'm completing this 2025 report, I think it would be really interesting to see if they continue to follow through in the following years. But from what I have seen, I would say the plans with the higher level of specificity do tend to target like those vulnerable areas the most.
Great, thank you. And I meant to preface my question with just thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So.
All right. Well, with that, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to thank our speakers, thank everyone for joining us.